think that many people have always had their dream place to live, whether they're far-reaching places such as the beaches of Maui or the French Riviera, or even more places that are closer to home relatively, like Colorado or somewhere around New York City. Some people might think that these are just, flights of fancy and it's never going to happen. But today I'm going to convince you why you should try living someplace other than California. I've got 3 main reasons for this. First reason is that it broadens your cultural experiences. Second reason, it's quite a bit easier to find jobs in other states. And third, it's just generally cheaper to live pretty much anywhere else. The first reason, it broadens your cultural horizons. And I can think of 2 good examples of this. There are many different cultures in the U.S., just like there are many different cultures around the world. And the biggest cultures that I know are food and sports. So, we all know that California, we've got our college football here, we've got the Trojans, and we're pretty big on them. But anyone who's been to the Midwest, Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, can tell that we don't really compare in that right. There are some real rabid fans out there. And sometimes it's interesting to get to know that culture and how it operates, and it's always fun to go root for the home team. And the second one is food. We know that California and the Southwest in general is renowned for Mexican cuisine, but there are just some things you can't really get out here. I've had particular trouble trying to find 2 of my favorites, Texas barbecue and New York style pizza. And there are some limitations, but they just don't cut it compared to the real thing. And the second reason is that it's easier to find a job in many other states. I can cite this from just statistics. The Bureau of Labor Statistics puts the national average unemployment at 8.2% as of March. Well, California's, also according to the Bureau, is 11%. So there are quite a bit more people competing for the same jobs that you want, or quite a bit less jobs that you can actually get. And the third reason is that it's just generally cheaper to live in to live outside of California. The average income for California is about $50,000 a year, taking in the entire state. Now this is only just a little bit higher than the $46,000 a year that's the national average. So you might think that you're making more money here in California. But when you factor in the cost of living in California is 45% higher than the national average, with most of that being housing, which is 101% above the national average. So, as you can, if you make the same amount of money here as you do somewhere else, you can get half the house. And for these reasons, while you may not just be able to pack up and move out of California, I want you to think about, maybe moving out of the state when you have the opportunity to do so, as it can benefit you in the long run and help you get ahead in life. Thank you.
Presuming. Priscilla, what did you think?
I thought the topic was interesting, and it can relate to us because there's probably many people who think about trying to move, so it's an interesting topic. And he had a lot of good eye contact, and you can see what the main structure was of how it broadens your culture, the jobs, and how it's cheaper. One thing that I thought that he can maybe work on is how it was a bit short, and maybe he can elaborate more on each ideas. On some of the ideas, he did have good statistics, and maybe he could talk about it more. It just seemed a little bit rushed.
Well, I think you're hitting the nail on the head here. I mean, most of the speech has got all the elements that you have. It just feels like it's a little underdeveloped. well, we've got a baby speech here, and it needs to be a grown-up speech. You need to add a little bit more to it. Tell us some of those stories. I like the reference, for instance, that you made to the cultural horizons. Look, you've got that obvious appeal about the football thing. I'm sitting here with a damn tie on, and you're going, okay, we can do that kind of thing. And I think you could talk about other things about the different parts of the country and give us an example of what the cultural difference is, whether it's football or the food thing, for instance. I mean, you're talking about the food thing, and you mentioned Texas barbecue. Let's build a little emotional appeal. I've lived here, and it's all nice, and sometimes you can find an okay barbecue place. But I tell you what, Texas barbecue is different. There's a particular flavor. There's this place that I went to when I was there that had this and that, and tell us about how fantastic it was. Get our mouths watering with the description of that thing and going, why am I sitting here and not moving to Texas to get that? You could add to the speech on each of those points. I like the 3 points that you had. It's well organized, but they each need to be developed a lot more. I thought that you did the best job of developing the argument on the economic issue. Basically, look, it's hard to get a job here. It's hard to get a job here for a variety of reasons. I think you could develop that a little bit more. Why is it that California is more problematic than other places? Maybe it's just a temporary thing that we have our unemployment rate is basically 30% higher than any place else in the country. Maybe that's just, a short-term thing. But if it's a long-term thing, if it's a continuing problem that California is going to have, that gives you an even better justification for moving. And I think you could talk about some of the things that cause those sorts of problems. Why do we have that disparity here? It could be a combination of things. The number of people that are moving here, businesses that are leaving, the business environment for the states, the cost that people have to pay in order to be able to locate here. That makes it just tough in California to compete on those sorts of levels, and so it's going to be harder for you to do. And you can develop those issues a little bit more, give some examples. And the statistics that you had were pretty good. I thought the cost of living statistics, for instance, that you did were very nice, where you talked about the housing costs especially, and your average costs are 45% higher than any place else. Well, now do a comparison. So, for instance, if you're making $46,000 in living in Colorado or Missouri, for example, here's what you would have to spend at the year in order for housing and your general costs, and here's what you'd have left over. Versus in California, here's what you'd have left over, and show us what the difference is. It's easier to buy a house, have much more left over, and, for example, plan vacations or take travel or enjoy food or whatever it is you want to do because you've accumulated that money. Living here in California, it's harder to do those things because you spent all your money trying to live here in California. And I think that that's a good way to maybe develop those kinds of ideas. So I don't have any problem with the ideas that you got. I just thought that they were underdeveloped. Your presentation, I'll tell you, I think on a couple of things you are so much better than you've been in the past. Your voice is a little bit more effective. You're smoother while you're talking to us. You do a very good job giving us eye contact. The one thing that I think is a little tricky is you just seem to be backing away from us the longer you're speaking. It's like I'm getting further and further back into this corner. Kind of watch yourself when you watch the video. You start far back in the beginning, but it just feels like, that's the only anxiety issue that I noticed during the presentation. Otherwise, I thought you'd made a lot of improvements. All right, thank you.